Good morning, everyone. So we're going to go ahead and get started today. First, to introduce myself. I'm Charlie O'Brien, Secretary General of Agrievolution.
And hi, good morning. My name is Ignacio Ruiz. I'm the Secretary General of ANSEMAT, the Spanish Association of Manufacturers.
So today we'd like to go over some information that we have available to you specifically and uniquely from Agrievolution. I'd like to start out just very briefly in terms of the history of Agrievolution. So we've been an alliance since 2008, and where the Agrievolution started. We've been an alliance operating from that point forward. We right now are represented by 13 countries around the world, key agricultural countries around the world, as equipment manufacturer associations. We're here today in part to celebrate. So we're celebrating our, I guess what you'd consider a graduation. And because although we've been an alliance and have done a lot of work over the last many years, we have now made a change in our organizational structure and we are becoming a legal entity. And so what that means is that we have the ability now to contract and to work with other global leaders and organizations that also share our mission of sustainable agriculture. And we can actually sign contracts with them and to promote around the world sustainable agriculture in a more formalized way than we ever have been able before. So we're very, very excited about that change in the Agrievolution structure. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ignacio to talk to some information that we've got that's unique relative to Agrievolution.
Thank you, Charlie. So good morning to everyone. So, okay, we're gonna try to explain why we are so proud of the work that we are developing in Agrievolution. And the first topic that we want to tackle is trying to assess how global markets for machinery are doing globally. So the first thing, So today we're going to try to show you a vision of how global markets are behaving right now. But first, we need to go trying to explain why it's so difficult. Next slide, please. Why it's so difficult to assess global markets for agricultural machinery. Next one, please. To assess the agriculture equipment trends, we have two different approaches. The most typical is talking about or discussing and analyzing the supply approach, which is a quantitative approach, since we have data for every single kind of machines in different countries, and we have the information in volume, units, or in value. But for trying to assess how markets are going to behave or are developing, we need to have different types of information. Like, for example, machinery use. We need to know how our partners, our member associates, our companies are manufacturing equipment. And we need to know also about imports and exports. That would be the equation to know, to get an approach on how global markets are behaving. And we have another approach. We have the non-quantitative approach. It's the crop demand. If we know how agriculture is developing worldwide or in different regions, we will know what is the potential demand for our companies. So for that kind of approach, we need to have data for production of the cultivated area and also imports and exports. So that would be the theory, but we have the other problem regarding the reality, and which are the challenges in the analysis of agriculture equipment. There is a high variability of equipment. We have a really strange code classification of machines, because we know that some types of machines are hard to have a code in the statistics worldwide. We have different code aggregation level by data source. Every single organization worldwide have different aggregation of codes for machines. We have regretfully missing data for machinery in use. It's really difficult to know which is the legacy fleet of machines in different countries around the world. We have misleading trade data by volume. We can only focus on value of the machinery because there are, every single month, the organizations are publishing data including wrong numbers for the units. And we have, for these different data sources, we have different time series availability. For example, for imports and exports, we have the previous year data, but for other types of statistics, we have at least 2 or 3 years delay in the publishing of the data. So how is next slide, please. So how is Agrievolution tackling such challenges? Okay, we are really proud to announce that after years of working with our partners, we've been doing a fantastic work trying to exchange different points of view, different databases, different information that we are already developing within our own associations, and we managed to try to find a solution for that. And we have 4 main points to tackle these problems. The first one is assessing long-term and short-term trends by identifying crop demand needs, identifying manufacturing capabilities of our member associates, assessing global trade flows, and by country, dealing with key drivers of the demand at regional or country level, dealing with technical regulation affecting the supply of machinery, or how the public sector intervention is affecting the market in a negative or positive way. We also analyze the public international data sources. For example, for manufacturing, we have now the information that UNIDO is publishing for free. We have, for the trade, we have the information from the United Nations Comtrade. For crop production, we have FAO or OECD as the main sources of information. Sorry. But that is valid for analyzing the current situation of the market. But now we have managed in Agrievolution to match the potential supply and demand with a solid economic analysis that is run by the International Trade Center. That information is unique and it's really important because they are developing a system based on really solid economic approach, dealing with, for example, with tariffs, with barriers to trade, with the dynamics of the market, with the potential agreement between bilateral or among different countries. And with that kind of information, we now are able to provide information about not only the potential demand by crops, but also the potential demand that our manufacturers have worldwide. And the last one that is really important for us is the hosting global summits, where our members and our partners are usually sharing information about the markets as a way to confirm the assessments that we are doing in the Alliance. So, the first approach would be how is the supply of mechanization doing worldwide? So now, the next slide, please. We are here with this graph, we are showing how mechanization is growing. We are showing a positive trend throughout time, showing that mechanization is the needed tool in order to improve and to increase the production of agricultural products. Now, with the data that we have for the year 2021, we have now reached or overpassed the $200 billion as a figure for the output globally of mechanization, and a trade that is surpassing $80 billion. But this situation is not the same among different regions. The next slide, please. For example, we have here how or which are the main regions as manufacturing potential with different levels of production and different levels of imports and exports. Now, with the data that we are offering, we now have Europe as the main region in the world producing or manufacturing machinery, and then we have Asia and Americas, and Pacific and Africa as the regions which have a low level of imports and exports and manufacturing. And the next one, please. But the levels of manufacturing at the levels of imports and exports are also different if we talk about which is the internal trade in every single region and the external trade. For example, Europe remains the main exporter and importer of machinery, but the main part of that exports and imports are done within the region, just in Europe. And we have Americas as having a main share of the exports at the regional level, and Asia increasing the share exporting outside the continent. And regarding the demand, so we have numbers to show how are the dynamics of the markets, but we need to know how agriculture is developing around the world in order to advise our companies on which are the main potential as exporters for their machines. So now the Agrievolution Alliance are able to run an analysis of how crops or main crops are developing worldwide. And with that kind of information, we can have an indicator called the potential machinery demand, a non-quantitative indicator showing how is the potential of demand of machinery in different regions around the world. For example, for fruits, we have information about the production, how the production has been increasing or decreasing in the last 10 years, which are the current exports, which are the potential exports for every single region for fruits. We have the trends, we have how the evolution of production of the cultivated area, we have the behavior of the regions as an importer and as an exporter of this kind of crops. We have information about which are the main regions exporting or importing to other regions, and with this kind of information we can establish a real simple indicator about the potential demand of machinery in every single region. For example, in Europe, we have an increase in the production for fruits, a decrease in the area. It's expected this region to behave more or less an importer for fruits. And that kind of information allows us to say that, for example, the machinery demand is going to be more or less stable in the next years. But other regions are expected to grow as demander of machinery. For example, the Americas or Africa or the Pacific at different levels of volume of machinery. In the next slide, we can show too how different regions for different types of machinery are expected to have a higher potential of demand of machinery. For example, for tractors, every single region are going to increase the production and export or import of tractors or harvesting machinery or sprayers and so on. And the next slide, we will also have the information to provide about the different regions as behaving as importers and exporters of machines, because we have already shown which is the volume of the potential exporting of every single region, that we can split that information in different regions, stating which is the expected trade within the regions and which are the expected trade with other regions around the world for different types of machinery. So we are really proud to show this kind of information. We think that it's a unique information that never has been released at a global level. And now, as Agrievolution, we are capable of showing to you all this information and sharing, trying to discuss how the mechanization is going to develop in the upcoming years. The situation is positive. Now we are living in this year. The situation is not quite good, but we are really confident that mechanization is going to grow as long as agriculture is expected to grow to feed the world. So now we expect you to have the Agrievolution Alliance as a data source provider, and we will be showing and we will be delivering information with all these databases to and assess among all the stakeholders all the information we have to show and to provide companies hope in the upcoming years that the situation is going to be growing and the situation is going to be positive. That this was some kind of a macro analysis, macro approach, but with our partners, we have more information that is shared in the Agrievolution Alliance regarding the country reports, regarding the information that we have at national level, because the macro trends do usually have, for example, this year, some data showing errors in the trend. For example, it's expected to grow, and all of a sudden the market is decreasing. And the solution for that kind of error in the trend is offered by the information that our experts from our partners are showing in the country report. So I'm going to give you the floor.
Okay, thanks, Ignacio. And as Ignacio said, started with the macro, and now we're going to go to more of a short-term, what's happening in a short-term perspective. As Ignacio said, we, members of Agrievolution Association, produce country reports twice a year, and we're making those available. They are available on our website, and the information that we're going to be sharing. I'm only going to share probably a very small piece of each one of the segments, and I'm going to take you on a tour around the world, if you will, of what's going on around the world. But this information won't be able to dive into all the details of what it means and the level of detail that you normally would want to have. But the information, again, there's some more information that I'm going to talk about today in the press release, and there's also the detailed reports that you'll be able to see on agrievolution.com, and you'll be able to pick up these country reports as well as other information on agrievolution.com. So if you want to go ahead a couple slides, please. One more. So I'm going to start with Japan. So Japan, rice shortage in Japan and reduced harvest last year as a result of extreme heat and some other natural disasters that were going on. In fact, rice was a very difficult commodity to have at all in the retail stores, and just started showing up again in October. In fact, because of the shortage, the price of rice has basically doubled, and which would increase some profit relative to farmers, but there is offsets. If you want to go to the next slide, please. Then the investment, because of the other rising prices in input costs, fertilizers and pesticides, basically is stable, mostly a stable market. You can see the change from last year in various different sectors, tractors, combines, rice. So fairly close to last year, maybe a slight downturn, but fairly close. Now I'm going to turn to France. In France, you'll see weather-related again, and certainly the rainfalls have created a real issue, and in fact, we've seen one of the lowest levels in the last 30 years for cereal output. And you can see the red dot way on the left-hand side. That's the output of cereals for the last, where it is last year, or this year, and again, it's one of the poorest yields of the last 30 years. If you go to the next slide, you can also see the order intakes have fallen by 13%. So fairly huge drop, and if you look at September, a very large drop as well, 37% in orders. And if you look to the right side, bottom side, you can see the different product sectors as well, and you can see a lot of down arrows overall. And again, the details will be made available to you on the website. As far as the rest of the year, if you go to that's good. If you go to look at the rest of the remaining year, expectations are down 15% for the remainder of the year. Next year will be down as well. The expectations or forecasts right now are down to 5%, but halfway through the year, and the expectation or the hope is that there'll be an increase then where the market will start to rebound a little bit in the second half of the year overall. Go to the next slide. Now on to Italy. And what you'll see in these country reports, when you look at the detail of the country reports, there's a lot of information. They start out with the kind of the what's happening in the economy as a whole, the commodities. Then they'll look at some of the trends from an equipment manufacturing perspective, and then they also provide some other data around different things that are going on, and then end up with, you know, what are the key influences of what's happening in the marketplace. Italy has provided information on the adoption rate of precision tools, and so almost 30% of farms are adopting precision agriculture, and so the adoption rate continues to go up. Probably not as far as equipment manufacturers would like to see it at this point in time, but certainly going up. Larger farms, as you would expect, have higher percentage of adoption of the precision technologies that are available to them. Then tractor registrations, because of, again, weather, there's a reason why we talk about weather so much in agriculture, because it certainly affects yields and what's going on, and then the yields affect the ability and the farmer's interest in buying new equipment. So tractor registrations are down 15%. If you go to the next slide, you'll see the other sectors. So combines, telescoping handlers, transporters, and trailers. You see negative numbers in front of all those areas. So market's been tough. Go to the next slide. In the past 4 years, you know, there's been a lot of difficulty. Again, a lot of weather-related issues. And I think in the last 4 years, there's been 96 extreme weather conditions that Italy has weathered, if you will. Floods, droughts, and very dry. There is access. So what's happened? Farm income has been down, and also there is access to public aid and subsidies, but the reality is they're a little difficult for farmers to access. Now let's go on to the United Kingdom. So farm incomes have been high in the last couple of years, but now they've taken a dive in 2024. Dairy farms took a hit worse than the projections were, and that's causing tractor registrations to be down about 15%. Again, weather has been an issue. Arable crop production hit hard this year and back to levels pre-Ukraine levels. And you can see the blue area on the map there. Those are where a lot of arable crops are grown, and you can see the kind of the moisture, the rainfalls, which is likely to impact actually 2025 as well. Excuse me. So the tractor registrations, excuse me, I referred to already. If you go to the next slide, implements are also being affected. On the next slide, please. And you can see the dramatic dive that's taking place overall with farm implements, and each one of those are listed there in terms of the implements. If you go on to the next slide, here's a that's the slide. If you go on and look at, here's the influencers, and again, on the reports, if you see the full report of these country reports that each member has submitted, you'll see the influences of the marketplace. So markets slowed down after 2 good years. I said farm income's down, farm confidence is lower, and so you'll see some of the other influences in terms of what's happening in the UK. If you go on to the next slide, we're going to talk about Argentina. And Argentina had one of the worst droughts ever, which I'm sure most people are aware of last year, and it certainly had an impact on what was going on in the marketplace as a whole. Fortunately, there's been a rebound. These are a few slides on the commodities. So soybeans are up. You can see the green line in terms of soybean production is up. Next slide, corn production is also up. There is another issue with corn, which I'll comment on in a minute. In the next slide, we'll talk about wheat, and you'll also see green lines. So there is a recovery from the severe drought that took place in Argentina last year. If you go to the next slide, please. So you can see what the impact that has on the equipment market as a whole. So you can see a lot of the red arrows going down. You can see the percentages of how much it's dropped. You know, harvesters down 19%, tractors down almost 30%. So you can see that the drought did have an impact on the ability and the farm income had an adverse effect in terms of farmers being able to invest in new equipment. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that although the red refers to the year numbers, you can see August, Argentina had a pretty good August, and perhaps recovery is starting, might be an indicator of some recovery starting in some of those areas with tractors, combines, and sprayers all being up fairly significant in their percentages compared to last year. So the conclusions, you'll see the recovery. I talked about corn. There's a corn stunt, spiroplasm impact, the bacteria that's having an impact. So even though there's been a recovery, the corn, it's not been as big as what we would have expected at all. But there, as I mentioned before, there is a recovery in some of the self-propelled equipment. If I move on to the United States now, the United States uses the term recession from an equipment growth perspective. So you see negative line under the 0% there as far as the growth rate is concerned. So softening certainly over the last 3 years. If you go to the next slide, you can see net farm income, and we haven't seen that level since 2015. So obviously net farm income has a significant impact in terms of the investment that farmers are willing and able to make on equipment. Go to the next slide. So this just shows, if you follow the blue line, you can see the low horsepower tractors under 100 horsepower and significantly underneath previous years in the 5-year averages. So sales are low, as we said, recession comparably to previous years. And if you go to the next slide, or excuse me, that high horsepower, greater than 100 horsepower. So not as bad a story. Certainly it's been above 5-year averages, but it's now slipped below in terms of where that is right now. So you can see crop prices continue to slide, and that's obviously what's having an impact. There's been less acreage that's been put into production this year. Crop prices have been very low, and as a result of that, again, net farm income is down, even though the yield, we had a pretty good yield from a yield perspective in the United States this year. So in summary, difficult year overall. You can see the different areas as far as cash that the farmers are getting. Production expenses are up. Federal support is down, and net farm income, as I mentioned before, is down. So the key takeaways, you can see recessionary mode, using the term recession from the ag equipment perspective. Used equipment values are diving, and so we're heading for another year probably of difficult year is what the expectation is. The only positive that could be is that with farmers not buying equipment for a year or two, there could be some pent-up demand that'll help maybe stimulate the market a little bit, but not high expectations for next year. Turn to Turkey. So if you look at Turkey, so you look at milk production increased by 9%. If you go to the next slide, please. Prices are continuing to go up, as are expenses. So if you look at the next slide, please. So tractor registrations were 25% down compared to Q2 of last year, even though production of tractors, I believe, was up 19% this last year, the last quarter. So what are the expectations in Turkey? So it's getting worse, and it's kind of going the wrong way in terms of expectations. I would just comment, there's another piece of information that Agrievolution has. It's called a barometer, and it's really a survey that we conduct to member companies from around the world. Same questions are asked, and they're asked what the sentiments are overall, what their expectations are overall on a worldwide perspective, and we compare and contrast each region of the world. So that information is available, and the expectations are certainly provided on the barometers that Agrievolution can provide to you. If you go to the next slide, please. So here's the key drivers in terms of what's happening in Turkey. So you've got a currency weakness and policies, drawbacks on support, and a bigger slump in the economy as a whole, and decline in farmer income. So you can see here's the key drivers in terms of what's happening with Turkey as a whole. China, forecast for China, favorable conditions. Last year in 2023 had a depressed market, and so the bar is lowered in terms of what's expected in China. In terms of there's strong demand for replacement, and so the turnover of equipment as they're being replaced now, policy support. Certainly the government is supporting agriculture with their policies. And so there also is a continuation of the tier 3 to tier 4 in terms of emissions control. It's had some impact, but not large impacts in terms of sales in China. Next slide, please. And so here's the forecast from China's perspective. Tillage equipment is going to be slightly down. Combine harvesters, 10 to 12%, up, and combine harvesters slightly up, as well as rice transplanters. So you see the market is increasing in China as well as replacement takes place. Next slide. So here's Spain, and talking about the geographic regions of where agriculture takes place. If you go to the next slide, you see the subsidies and what's happening with non-subsidized and subsidized equipment, and subsidies have stimulated the market, and as subsidies are not in place, then unsubsidized equipment sales increase in that particular area. So you can see there's a recovery that's taken place, slight reduction in the units overall, but because of the value of the equipment as well as inflation, the value is up 16% overall. And so there's continued recovery, I guess, overall from Spain's perspective. So again, though, that's kind of the end of the world tour, if you will, and I apologize for the kind of pace of going through the world tour. Again, just wanted to expose you to the type of data that's available to you. And certainly encourage you to not only read the press release, but go into Agrievolution.com so you can see the full reports of these country reports, and they'll be made available to you. These reports, the full reports, will be out on the website as early as next week, as will the presentation that Ignacio put on. One final thing, if you go to the next slide. Ignacio talked about summits, and what's big for us in 2025, in addition to the data piece, will be the next summit. So our next summit we want to announce will be in Buenos Aires, Argentina, September 1st through 3rd. And we've had many summits around the world, and our summits, the last one was hosted by Ansaman in Spain. Many summits around the world over the years. We generally hold them about every 2 years. Obviously that was impacted a little bit by COVID, as everything else was. But we will be having our next summit in Argentina. And it's a place where key influencers, agriculture, key members of each one of our associations is in attendance, as well as agricultural ministers, anybody that's influencing agriculture. So we invite everybody, we invite members of the press to certainly attend. I think you'll find it worthwhile in terms of sharing of information. And the information that's shared, there's kind of a global view of what's taking place and transpiring, and then we also talk about what's happening in more detail in the region. So we want to go to the next slide, give you an idea of the topics that will be discussed while we're in Argentina next year. Obviously, conservation practices are key, and just certainly because of the region, smart farming overall, improving production, environmental conservation. And we'll also be inviting farmers to serve on a panel and talk about their implementation of some of the tools that are now available to them. So that's something new that we haven't really necessarily done before, is to have a farmer panel on the Agrievolution. We will also, as we did in Spain, we'll have a field day where we can actually get out and look at some of the equipment in action and answer questions at that point in time for presentations on farming and farm management. So with that, that's kind of the information that we had with you today. We do have most members of Agrievolution with us today, so if you had more detailed questions, economic questions, or anything about the presentations, many members, and seek them out here, they can provide a lot more detail than what we've provided to you. And again, the information is going to be available to you on agrievolution.com, and we would certainly appreciate your attendance today at our press conference and look forward to providing you, and hopefully you consider us as a key resource for you for data as we go forward. And feel free to reach out to us as Agrievolution, or feel free to reach out to the regional associations as well. One thing we'd like to pride ourselves in, we're pretty rich in data, to the extent where you can almost get lost in it, but it's really good data, and now we have stuff that's more, not only just current information, but also long-term information. So thank you again, and we'd certainly open for questions if you have questions, and if we can't answer them up here, we'll direct them to the right people that are in the audience.